we are all set. So if you guys are ready, let me know and we will get started.
Ready.
All right, great. So I'm going to get us in there now.
Hey everybody, welcome to our program on behalf of Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. We're just gonna wait about 1 minute till everybody else comes in. In the meantime, again, welcome. I'll briefly repeat this afterwards, but for those of you who have not been to the museum before, you can see it behind me on my virtual screen. Okay, we'll be starting in just a minute. Okay, everybody, welcome to our program through Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. For those of you who have not been to the museum before, we are located in Los Angeles across from the Grove and Pan Pacific Park. You can see the museum behind me on my virtual screen. Of course, I'm not there, we're all working from home, but working from home, we regularly provide these sorts of virtual educational programs and survivor talks. This afternoon, you have the honor and privilege of listening to David Lenga, a Holocaust survivor, who will share his story with you. And afterwards, you'll have the opportunity to ask him questions. So you can type in the questions in the Q&A box, and you can type them in during the talk, but you might want to hold them afterwards in case it's something he mentions later. David, it is our honor to have you with us this afternoon. So thank you so much for being with us, and you can start your presentation.
Thank you. Okay, let me get to the, okay, so I should be able to control the,
Exactly.
but
so you click share screen.
Share screen. Okay.
Then do you see your presentation again?
Yes, I see the presentation, yes.
Okay, so click on that.
Okay, got it. I got it. I
Great.
got it.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the program. I'm very honored to appear before you and be able to speak to you about my experiences during the Holocaust. Unfortunately, there are very few of us left anymore, and those that are still able, like myself, to appear in front of audiences, it's a great privilege for me to do this. Let me start out by telling you that the Holocaust was not the start of my life. I was born in Lodz, Poland, on December the 3rd, 1927. And I was born into a very large Jewish family. My extended family from both my father's and mother's side numbered almost 100 people. And when the war ended, only 2 of us survived. But when I came to this world, I came to this world to a very warm environment. I had, as mentioned, a large family, a Jewish family, a very religious family. And I was surrounded by Jewish life, a vibrant Jewish life before the war. In the 20s, even in the 30s, life was very wonderful in terms of Jewish culture, Jewish traditions. We had so many synagogues. We had 5 Yiddish newspapers in the city of Lodz. We had live theater, and we had a vibrant Jewish life. And this is the life that I was born into. And my growing up years, obviously, I had to learn Polish because my first language that I knew was Yiddish, because everyone in my family spoke to me Yiddish for the first 2 years or 3 years of my life. And then I had to mingle, of course, on the outside with playmates, and I had to learn Polish. So by the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I was bilingual. The reason I'm bringing this up is because in Poland, the Jewish population numbered roughly 10% of the entire population of Poland. Lodz, in particular, in other big cities like Warsaw and Krakow, had a very vibrant life, and most Jews gathered the biggest cities. Some, of course, were scattered in little shtetls all around Poland. But I was in a big city. I was in Lodz, Poland, and I knew the big city life. And so as I was growing up, I have a younger brother by the name of Nathan. He was 4 years younger than me. And as I was growing up, and I was about 11 years old, 10 years old maybe, I was subjected to a wave of anxiety surrounding me. The fact that Hitler came to power in Germany in 1930s, and we all the adult people, of course, knew about the Mein Kampf that he wrote, the manifesto, the book in which he outlined in no uncertain terms what his intentions are against the Jewish people. For a long time, before the outbreak of the war, people both in Germany and in Poland and in Europe in particular thought he was a madman, and that what he was saying was insane. This cannot happen, especially in a country like Germany, where everyone in Europe, maybe in the world, looked up to in terms of culture, in terms of civilization, in terms of contribution to society and science. I mean, these were icons in the world of intelligentsia, and everybody respected that, and it was unfathomable. It was just totally unbelievable that what he was saying in that book could ever come to fruition. History proved us so wrong. So when I was about 10 years old in 1938, the atmosphere and the forebodings about pending war, possible pending war, became ever greater, and the anxiety grew by the moment, and the adults were huddling and talking to each other, and what are we going to do? And the Jewish people became very anxious because we realized that all this fantasy that what Hitler was intending to do could never happen started to happen in Germany. And it happened with a great bang, if you will, with the advent of the Kristallnacht, where thugs, Nazi thugs, roamed the streets and broke the windows of Jewish businesses and scrawled with graffiti, "Dirty Jew," and chased the Jews out of their homes and persecuted them. And then the Nuremberg laws came in that deprived the Jews of all rights. And slowly, step by step, he was feeling his way, how far he could go in his nefarious plans. And Germany was the first victim because he had the Jews right there in front of him in his own Germany. And he devastated the society, Jewish society. And there was no difference whether you were a professor, whether you were a teacher, whether you were a musician or an icon in the art world. It made no difference. When you were a Jew, you were persecuted. Even Albert Einstein had to flee for his life. And so when this happened, a lot of Jews that were not born in Germany, but they were German citizens, like my aunt's brother. He lived in Berlin with his family for many years, maybe 30, 40 years. And then he had to flee for his life. And he came back to Poland. He knew nothing about Poland because he was living all this in Germany. But he told us after he came, in eyewitness report, an account of what happened. And he was, of course, the best example because he was there. And so, knowing all this, the Jews of Europe, especially Poland, were totally at a loss of what their next step was supposed to be. And many of them in my family, my mother's and my father's siblings, and there were many of them, they were all huddling together and trying to find out the way, what is the best way to do the next thing. Many of them suggested, let's leave Poland. Let's go to Russia. Let's go to England. Let's go to some place far away, away from Hitler's clutches. And everybody was like in disbelief and shrugging it off and said, nah, it could never possibly be as bad as they all make it sound. It is just impossible for this to happen. And anyway, how can we leave? We have our factories, our homes. We had our lives built up here for generations. We can just leave everything and run. It's insane. And so they didn't. Some did. And those that did were fortunate enough to survive the war. Those that didn't were not that fortunate. They perished. My parents, like many others, my uncles, they all decided to stay. We had a factory. My father was a manufacturer. We had a tannery in a small town 18 kilometers south of the city of Lodz. We were upper middle class. We were well-to-do, and we didn't need anything before the war. Life was beautiful. And then suddenly, all this foreboding. Then, when I was 11 years old, one day, I find myself on a streetcar going on an errand for my mom to deliver some debt that she owed to someone. And as I was riding on the streetcar, full packed with people, about 15 minutes into the ride, all of a sudden, the big sirens of the city start blaring something terribly alarmingly. And all the adults knew what that meant. It means danger is approaching. Danger is to be expected any moment. And so everything stopped on the streetcars, the cars, everybody are running for their lives, running for shelter into different buildings seemingly without any reason, because I couldn't understand what is happening. But before I had a chance even to think, an armada of German attack planes descended upon the civilian population right in front of me and machine gunned indiscriminately into the crowd. And in front of my eyes, at 11 years of age, I witnessed a slaughterhouse. I witnessed body parts flying. I witnessed a river of blood on the street and panic. And people were running for shelter to save themselves from the bullets above. And I was also one of those that ran into the next building to save myself. This must have lasted, I don't know how many minutes, but a lot of people died in that raid. And when they finally left, the mayhem was done. And people were in total stunned. They were total disbelief. And nobody could figure out what just happened. What happened, folks, that was September the 1st, 1939. What happened was that incident, that attack was the beginning of World War II, the beginning of Hitler's Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. When I stood there dumbfounded in this house that I looked shelter for, in the yard, one thought permeated. I needed to go home to my mom and dad as quickly as possible. I didn't dare to go to the main streets. What if they come back with another attack? So I was trying to find my way through the courtyards, through the alleys, through fences, through rooftops, however I could find shortcuts to come home. And I did. And when I came home, the streets were deserted. And the houses, in the middle of the day, the houses were shuttered. The windows were shuttered, unheard of in the middle of the day. When I approached my home, I frantically knocked on the door, and my parents were beside themselves. They didn't know what happened to me, so they was relieved to hear the knock, and they opened the door quickly and pulled me in and asked me to tell them what I just saw, because they only heard it in the radio, that Poland was attacked and World War II started. I told them what I saw. At that point, my dad became very somber. He sat me down, my brother, my mom, and he said to us in no uncertain terms, he said, I want you to understand, he said, that what you just witnessed now, what we all witnessed now, is the beginning of the darkest time in Jewish life in Poland. I have no idea what is happening next, neither does anyone else. But what we need to do in the next few days, in the next foreseeable future, is to try to stay together as much as we can and look for solace within each other. That's all he could muster to say. And so before long, within a day or two, all the announcements were clustered all over the city in German and Polish and even in Yiddish, announcing to the population that they all have to stand on this day, they have to stand on the sidewalks, all of them coming out from their homes and standing on the sidewalks and welcoming the German occupying forces. And so I had no choice. So my mom and dad and my brother, we had to go there to welcome the German army, to watch them march into Poland. And the civilian population, which consisted mostly of Catholic Poles, because they were the majority of the people. These were the people that were our neighbors. They were our friends. They were our teachers. They were our partners in business. These were people we knew a lifetime. These are people that we trusted, we considered as friends. Those very people stood there, and they not just merely welcomed the German army, but they welcomed them with flowers. And the women threw themselves on the soldiers and kissed them, welcome to the city. I was outraged at the sight. At the age of 11, I said to my dad standing next to me, I said, oh my God, what I'm looking at, these people are traitors. They just betrayed their own country. They welcomed their enemy with flowers and kisses. What is going on? I said it loud, but my dad hushed me up really fast. And he says, just keep those thoughts to yourself. Don't say another word. It's very dangerous what you're saying. And so we witnessed the spectacle, and we all came home very downtrodden, very depressed, not knowing what's next. In the next few days, something else happened, something horrible. Hunger set in, because once Poland collapsed, the money became worthless overnight, and the farmers did not want to sell their products, and the retail stores closed their stores for the same reason. And so people didn't have what to eat. Their mothers couldn't get milk for their children. In the beginning, it was chaos. It was panic. Poland was the most fertile country in Europe before the war. Poland was a net exporter of food for the rest of Europe. Never did a person have to go hungry in Poland. because there was such an abundance of food. And then all of a sudden, overnight, there was no food to be got. So the authorities that be in a hurry, they set up kitchens and they set up outlets to deal out pieces of bread and butter and cheese or whatever it was available on coupons, on rations. And this is how it was for the next few days. It was a terrible time. Within about 5 days of that spectacle, a Jeep pulls up in front of our home, a German Jeep with 3 soldiers, SS, with drawn weapons. One of them comes out and knocks frantically on our door or our house. My mother saw this happening from the kitchen window, and she panicked. And I was clinging to my mother's skirt, and so was my brother. And the Germans started yelling really loud, "Aufmachen! Aufmachen! Open up!" So my father said to my mom, "Let me go to the front door and see what they want. I don't understand. Why did they pick us?" So he opens the door, and this German assessment looks at my dad and he said, "Are you Abraham Lenga?" And he says, "Well, yes. You come with us and you come now. No questions asked." Very sternly. And my dad turns to my mom and he said, "Sarah, I'll be back as soon as I can. I'll find out what they want." They took him away and they took him to the German Gestapo headquarters. The Gestapo was the equivalent of the FBI here. They interrogated him briefly and they told him in no uncertain terms. The commander looked at him and he said, "We know that you are the owner of the factory in Strykow, of the tannery, and we are here to tell you right here and now that as of now, you are no longer the owner of that factory. That factory is confiscated by the Third Reich. It belongs to the German government. You are required and ordered to work for the German government in that factory. We will supply with raw materials, and you supply all the labor that is necessary from among the Jews in Strykow, where the factory is located." And that was an order. "We will come within 3 days and pick you up from your home and take you to Strykow." At that point, my dad realized the futility of even protesting. So he only managed to say, "Sir, but I need to have my family with me if I'm going to have to go." And so they acceded to his request because they needed him. And so he was able to work it out so that my mom and I, and my brother, and my grandma also that lived with us, we were all taken in the next 3 days on a truck, loaded up, and not allowed to take anything with us, nothing else but what we had on our backs, and took us with a truck to 18 kilometers south of Lodz to the city of Strykow. That's where the tannery was. There, they confiscated a house that belonged to some family before, and they assigned us that house in which to live and to work in the city. And within days, they summoned the Jews of Strykow, and they told them in no uncertain terms that the German government has created as perimeter in the city within which the Jews may live. And only in that perimeter. And they may not get outside of that perimeter without specific permission by the government. So in effect, what they did, they created the ghetto. Everyone seemed to understand the severity of what is happening, but no one could do anything about it. And so the Jews were trapped in a ghetto. My dad realized almost immediately that those that are employed by the Germans, working for the Germans government, those people have a better chance of survival. And those that they consider deadwood and not employable or not able-bodied, they have no chance of staying alive. So he prevailed with the commander there that he needs to have 50% more labor than he actually did. He says he needed a labor force to put the factory in motion. Well, it was only Jews, so they didn't care. It was slave labor anyway for them. So they said, okay. So by virtue of him doing this, he employed 50% more people than he needed. And those 50% of the people that he employed, their life was basically saved for the duration. They never forgot it. And so myself had to work there in the factory. My mom had to work, my dad. My brother was too young, and so he stayed with my grandma at home. But every adult, every person that wanted to eat and get a ration at coupon had to work and report for work every single day. This was going on for 2 years in that city of Strykow, from 1940 to 1942. During those 2 years, there was disease, there was famine, there was deliberate undernourishment of the population. There was no hospital, no doctor, and no cure, and no medicine. Nobody to turn to for help. If a person got sick and died, so be it. Just another Jew died. The Germans couldn't care less. This is what their plan was in the first place, to eliminate the Jews. After 2 years of this horror, something happened in the German command or hierarchy, where they realized that there's a lot of pressure put on them militarily on the fronts, different fronts. And they decided to eliminate all the small town ghettos, which were many, and select the able-bodied men and women from that place and throw them into the larger established ghettos already. This was 1942. So during those 2 years, since they occupied Poland, they were able to build up those larger city ghettos with fences, with electric wires, with guards and towers and German shepherd dogs guarding. It was just a total prison. And so they made selections, and they told us, the population of Strykow at that time, all the Jews, that they have to report to the Jewish cemetery in Strykow at a certain time and date. And there they're going to be selected for going to work in other areas of Poland. They didn't tell us where. And so we all had to report to the cemetery in Strykow. The ghetto was dismantled, and in that cemetery, there were men, women, and some children, I guess. We were sitting there for 3 days and 3 nights without anyone telling us what is happening. We were not given any food during that time, no water, no toiletry, no place where to alleviate yourself. It was living hell. People were crying, lamenting, wringing their hands, praying to God. It was a horrible scene. And so this is the place where we were told to be. And after 3 days and 3 nights, they start making their selection. Big trucks came with military and dogs, with weapons, strong. And we had to stand in lines, long lines. And on the top of, at the head of each line, there was an officer, a German officer. And with his thumb, he was making the decision who is going to live and who's going to die. Who is going to be considered able-bodied and be thrown into the larger ghettos, and who is not, goes to the left to be eliminated or sent to slave labor camp. During that selection, and during that particular time, in 1942, my dad became deathly ill with double pneumonia. When they took him away from us, along with all the other men, my mom turned to me and she said, "David, I do not believe that your dad is going to survive the night. That's how sick he is. They took them away. We had no idea where they took them at that time. Nobody told us anything. We were always kept in the dark. And my mom, myself, my brother, and my grandma, we were thrown into the Lodz Ghetto along with so many others to work. In the Lodz Ghetto, in 1942, we were assigned by a Jewish administration already, headed by the eldest of the Jews. We were assigned places where to live. We had to share apartments with other families. We were assigned a place where to work. And we had to work every single day, because if we didn't work, we didn't get rations, no coupons, and no food. Within no time at all, we realized the horror of the Lodz Ghetto. We realized the deliberate starvation again on a much larger scale. And people were dying in mass. I've witnessed during those times, I witnessed horrors that have seared themselves into my soul that I could never, ever erase. I've witnessed naked corpses, dead, naked corpses of men and women thrown onto lorries, onto carts, driven not by horses, but by men, and driven out of the ghetto to mass graves to be burned and disposed of. Nobody ever knew who these people were or cared. It became a fight for survival on every level and every second of life. And self-preservation became the greatest concern. How do I survive today? My next hour, my next morning, my next day. The horror was so horrendous that people were bereft. They became bereft of any humanity. They became bereft of compassion. They became bereft of humanity. They became bereft of feeling with somebody. They were like living dead, basically. Many so emaciated, you could count the ribs on their bodies. And in this atmosphere, in this situation, I find myself along with so many others. And in 1942, that same year that we were thrown to the ghetto, that was late in fall, I think it was in September, the Germans decided to make the greatest raid on the ghetto. And the purpose of that raid was to eliminate what they call dead wood, people that they considered no longer able-bodied, the sick, the infirm, the too old, the too young, the frail, anyone that they consider not able-bodied any longer, they were dead wood to be eliminated. And so they made the people from the ghettos get out from their apartments and stay in long, long lines to be selected. And at the head of each line was a German officer making the determination with his thumb, right or to the left. It was a horrendous time. I want to show you here my family while we're talking about it. This is my paternal family that I come from. This is my Lenga family. You could see my grandparents on both sides, all these children, my uncles, my aunt, and here is my father, 6 years old, that was taken in 1907. This is my paternal family that I lost in the war. Here is my maternal family. That is an unveiling. Here's my dad, my mom, her sister, Hella, her husband. Here's my other aunt, my mom's younger sister. Here's my Bubi, my grandmother that I loved and adored, and all the other family that gathered at the unveiling. This family in its entirety, I lost as well. And then in the ghetto, the minute the Germans arrived, they start not only harassing the Jews and killing them, but humiliating them as well. Here, a German soldier is cutting the beard of religious Jews. Most of the Jews in Poland were religious. They all had beards. But you know, they were not just cutting the beards. They were pulling their hair and blood was flowing. That happened to my grandfather in the Lodz Ghetto. This is what the Nazis did. The terror they set into the population. And here you could see where the Jews were evacuated away from their places where they lived for God knows how long, and they had to leave everything there and just take a few belongings with them and evacuate into the ghetto walls. This was the evacuation of the Jews into the ghetto in 1939, when the Germans entered the city. So this is where I now found myself, in the ghetto. And we had to stand in long line, as I said, for the raid. And I watched the people ahead of me, in front of me, how they are being told to go to the left or to the right. My mom stood in front of me. I stood behind her. Behind me was my younger brother, Dayton. And behind him was my grandmother, Hinda. And all the other people from our district. As the line moved forward and he looked at my mom, in 1942, she was only 41 years old. Of course, she was able-bodied. So he told her to go to the right, back to the ghetto to work. When my turn came, I was at that time a kid of maybe 14 years old. My brother was 10. He looked at me, he looked at my brother, and he told us to go to the left along with my grandma and all the other people that they selected. So we were separated from my mom, my brother and I, at that point. She went to the ghetto and we were taken away. And we wound up, those people that were selected to the left, including me and my brother, we wound up in a huge warehouse in the outskirts of the city of Lodz. Huge warehouse, hundreds of people were selected to die. But we were not told that because everything was kept a secret from us. So we sat there in total disbelief and in total anxiety, and we don't know what is next. And we're waiting and we're waiting. So what happened in between, when my mom realized that she just lost her children, that the Germans took us away from her, she became so despondent, she ran to her sister, the only sister that was still in the ghetto, her older sister, and she said, Bina, she says, they just took away my children. I lost my husband, now I don't have my children, I don't have anyone that I ever loved, everybody is taken away from me, my life is devastated, I cannot live this way without my children. I cannot. So the sister said, what do you intend to do? She says, I'm going to go back to the line, tell the SS to take me where my children are. Whatever happens to them, happens to me. And her sister realized how dangerous this move would be, so she tried to dissuade her and said, you cannot do that, Sarah. She says, try to find another way to get your children back. And my mom thought this was mad talk. What other way is there? And she says, you go to your brother-in-law. He is the head of the clothing factory in the city of Lodz. He is in charge of such enterprise, and he knows very many important people in the ghetto. He may be able to help you to get your children back. He'll be able to talk to someone in authorities, pull some strings, and help you to get your children. Go talk to him. So she went to talk to him, and she pleaded with him, please help me to get my children back. I cannot live without them. And he looked at her and he said, Sarah, do you really think that I have any power at all? I'm just a Jew and disposable Jews like everybody else. They need me right now for their purposes. So I'm here, but I have no power. I have no say so. I cannot intervene. I cannot tell anybody what to do. Nobody's listening to me. And so she left him very disheartened, very, very, very despondent. And she did exactly what she said to her sister that she's going to do. She reported to the lines, to the SS, and told them, take me where my children are. Whatever happens to them happens to me. They took her away. And I never saw my mom again. In the meantime, while all this was going on, I was sitting with my brother in that warehouse along with all these hundreds of people. And folks, after my mom left my uncle, something had to happen, which I cannot put my finger on, but something important did happen. Why? Because all of a sudden in that warehouse, I hear through a bullhorn my name being called, only my name among all these people. David Lenga, come to the front door. Very loud. And I was stunned. I said to my brother, did you hear my name called? This is crazy. What did they know about me? Who am I? My brother said, you go to the front door and find out what they want. May be important. So I said, Nathan, you're right here. I'll be right back. So I go to the front door, and as I approach this burly, menacing looking man at the door, he looks at me and he says, as I approach, he says, are you David Lenga? I says, yes, I am. He opens the door a crack and he says, get the hell out of here, fast, go run back to the ghetto, run. Don't even look back, run. And I said, but I want my brother here. I want him with me. He says, never mind your brother, we'll take care of him. And so I ran to the ghetto frantically. I ran, and the first thing I ran to was my home. And I was expecting my mom, because I saw with my eyes that they told her to go back to the ghetto to work. I didn't know what happened in between. And so instead of my mom, I found her sister, my aunt. And I said to her, and Bina, where is mom? And she knew exactly what happened. But she saw me so distraught. She says, you need to sit down and calm down. Wait, maybe your mom went to look for you guys, for you and your brother. She'll be back. And I did not believe a word she was saying because it was impossible. But I had no choice. So I sat there and I was waiting and waiting for hours. And when many hours passed by, my mom didn't show up. I just really got hard on my end. And I said, listen, you need to level with me. You're not telling me the truth. What happened to mom? Why isn't she back? And at that point, she broke down and she told me the truth. And when that happened, my whole world collapsed on me, literally collapsed on me. Because at 14 years of age, I realized I became a total orphan. I have no father, no mother, no brother, no relative, no one that I ever loved in my life or loved me was anymore with me. And I'm alone. And at 14 years of age, I couldn't cope. I became very depressed, very despondent, and I became suicidal. In fact, about 3 days after this happened, I found myself going up on an abandoned building to the attic or the third floor, and I tried to pry open the rusty window to throw myself down from the third floor and end my life, because life had no meaning. I had nothing to live for, nobody to live for. That's how bad and bleak and dark it was. And as I was trying to pry open that window, I could feel someone coming from the back, grabs me by my scruff of my neck and pulls me back. And that was my Aunt Bina. And she says, I'm not going to let you do it. I'm not going to let you end your life that way. If you lose hope, you lose everything. We must not ever get to the point where we lose hope, because there's always another tomorrow, she says to me. I know it's bleak now, and it may be bleak for the foreseeable future, but we have to persevere. And you will come with me, and you will stay with me and my son. She had her only son there with her, also my cousin. And so the three of us came to her apartment, and we lived as a family. But my life did not turn around at that point. It was still very, very dark, very depressed, and very suicidal. I was very suicidal. But I had to work every day. the ghetto, if you don't work, you don't eat. You don't get rations, you don't get coupons. So I had to report for work every single day. And that idea that I had to spend 10, 12 hours at work every day, put my mind to what I'm doing, in some ways, in some retrospective ways, it was like a palliative. It was kind of a remedy for me to overcome the horrible depression and just try to accept my fate. Over time, hunger was the paramount power force that ate at everybody. Over time, I had to accept what has happened, and I had to go to work every day. And during the time in the ghetto, my uncle took me under his wing. He had a position of power there, and he was teaching me step by step every phase of the production of clothing. By the time I was 15 years old, I was a full-fledged tailor. I acquired a trade. I acquired a means, maybe one day, to stand on my own feet. And that also saved my life later on in concentration camp. But I had to work every single day like everyone else. In 1940, during those intervening times between 42, when we were thrown into the ghetto, to 44, and after I became alone, my mom was taken away, and my brother. During those intervening times, we suffered a horrendous amount of deaths in the ghetto and starvations. And the starvation became so unbelievable that I, myself, and my aunt and her son, we were on the verge of death. We were so starved. And I became despondent. And I started listening. I started listening to the adults around me, whispering about things. And what I found out was that on the outside, on the very outside of the fence of the Lodz Ghetto, of that wire fence, there were huge fields, newly tilled, with soft ground, with all kinds of vegetables and potatoes and other kind of vegetables growing there by Polish farmers. But how does anyone ever reach out to those fields to get a little food? Impossible. They were guarded. The ghetto was guarded with guards, with towers, with machine guns, with soldiers, with dogs. Impossible. And yet, hunger drove me to such an extent that I decided to take life in my own hands. I knew the danger, but I didn't care. I was about that starved. So I procured a burlap sack in an abandoned house. And in the middle of the night, without telling anyone anything, I snuck out from the house, and I found my way very slowly in the dark, on the cover of darkness, to the edge of the ghetto walls where the wire fence was. And there, when I reached that point, and it was very, very quiet and very dark, I bent down and I felt with my very hands the soft earth. It was newly tilled, right on the other side of that fence where all those potatoes sticking out from the ground. All I had to do is find my way to the other side and fill the sack. And I was determined to make it happen. And so I start with my very hands, my very own hand. I try to dig in that soft ground, a hole big enough for me to be able to slip underneath the barbed wire. And I was succeeding. I was succeeding because my body was emaciated and I was small and thin. And I found this hole big enough where I slid under, and I found myself with my sack on the other side where the fields were. And I start filling in the potatoes in the dark, on the cover of darkness. I had half a sack of potatoes already, and I was ready to pull back in a hurry back to the ghetto and home. And just as I was trying to do this, with a half sack full of potatoes, a reflector all of a sudden came upon me from the tower above. And an older German soldier looking down at me with a machine gun drawn right next to my head. He is outraged and I'm petrified. I figured this is the end of me. So he yelled at me, he says, verflucht nochmal, was machst du denn hier? Wer bist du denn? In German. God damn it, what are you doing here? Who are you? And I start pleading with him. I start pleading to his conscience. I said, sir, please don't shoot me. I'm trying to save my life. I'm trying to save the life of my family. We are starving to death every single day. I said, here is so much food. Please let me just have those few potatoes, and I promise you I'll never be here again. And sir, I looked at him. He was an older man. He could have been my grandfather, because all the younger Germans were in the front in Stalingrad and Leningrad in Russia, and the German government employed older retired Germans to be guards in those ghettos. And so I looked at him like a grandfather figure, and I pleaded with him, sir, maybe you have a grandson my age. I says, would you please consider just letting me live and not shoot me and let me have those potatoes? And as I plead with him, he looks at me. And to my total astonishment, he lowers the rifle, he turns off the reflector, and he yells at me, verflucht dabei, mach mal, dass du loskommst. God damn it, get the hell out of here. And I don't ever want to see you here again. He says, if I do, I shoot you on the spot. Understood? And I say, yes, sir. And I just flew right in that hole back into under the fence with my potatoes. And I find myself inside the ghetto. It was a total miracle. I took the life in my own hands, and somehow I survived. Don't ask me why or how, or maybe it was some saving angel watching over me. I don't know the answer. All I knew is my life was saved, and I wound up with a half a sack of potatoes inside the ghetto walls. Now I had a problem. How do I get them home? I was too weak, too emaciated to carry that half a sack of potatoes. I had to drag it. Took me a long time, and I was scared to death, because if anyone in the ghetto, any inhabitant of the ghetto, would see me with food, they would lynch me, they would take my potatoes away, they would probably kill me. And I was scared. But as scared as I was, I mustered all my efforts and I dragged those potatoes home. Took me a long time. And I was praying all along the way that the sun should not come up so that no one should be able to see me. And I was succeeding in coming in when it was still dark. My aunt was despondent. She went through during the night and to a bathroom and she didn't see me and she didn't know what happened to me. Why am I not there? And so when I finally knocked on the door and I said, Bina, open up. This is me, David, open up. And so she opens it up frantically, pulls me inside, and I tell her the story. She was in disbelief. Those potatoes were saving us for months, But yet we had to go to work every day. Life had to go on just as it was. People were still starving and dying. And this is the atmosphere I was in. And so this was going on till 1944. Around the fall of 1944, things happened around me, around the Jewish people, that we were totally unaware of because we had no access to any kind of information, radio or newspaper or any kind of information. We didn't know what was happening around us, but what was happening in reality was that the Allied forces were encircling Germany from every side. They came from north, east, west, and south. The Russian army was pressing on forward towards Poland, going westward. The Germans were retreating in great numbers. They suffered great losses in Stalingrad and in Leningrad. They became panicky and they realized they cannot sustain the ghetto anymore. So they announced in 1944, with plastered announcements all over the ghetto, that the ghetto is going to be eliminated on this and this day, and all the inhabitants, region by region, block by block, they have to report to the substation in Marishin, which is a train substation, to be taken to Germany for labor. And they dismantled all the machinery and all the industry in the city of Lodz to be reassembled in Germany proper. And so block by block, people had to report under the threat of death, they had to report to go to Germany. Because if they're caught and they're not reporting, they're going to be killed on the spot. When my turn came, when the turn came of our block to report, the day before, my aunt and her son, Jacob, he came to me and they said to me, David, be prepared. Tomorrow we are leaving. We are reporting to go to be taken to Germany for work. The ghetto is being eliminated. But folks, during that particular time, in 1944, the war was raging all around. In the ghetto, in Lodz, we could hear the reverberations of the front explosions. We could hear the cannon fire, shattering walls. We could hear the front being so near that I could smell liberation. And I said to my aunt at that point, I said, look, we are all adults at this point. You have to do what you need to do. I cannot tell you what to do. If you want to report it, then so be it. If you and your son want to go and report voluntarily to go to Germany, then you have to do what you feel that you have to do. But I have made the decision, I'm not going. And so my aunt looks at me like I was a madman. And you absolutely have your mind. What do you mean you're not going? You're going to stay alone here? Yep, I'm going to stay alone and I'm going to wait. I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to take a chance to outwait liberation. If the Russians, I reasoned it to myself, if the Russians are so close that I could hear the reverberations of the front all around me, then maybe in a day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week, if I can hold out, I may be liberated by the Russians and I don't have to go to Germany. And so I made this decision to stay in the ghetto and hide. And the ghetto was emptied out in no time. Everybody seemed to have left. And one day I found myself alone in the ghetto in 1944. I was scared. I had to sustain myself. I couldn't show my face. I couldn't show my whereabouts. I could not make myself seen because I'm going to be shot on the spot. And so at night, I was scavenging for food. When people left, many of them in a hurry, they left pieces of food here and there. And I was widening the perimeter every night to go to these abandoned buildings and find scraps of food to sustain myself. And one day, I think that was the 4th or the 5th day already in hiding, one day I ventured out to a larger perimeter and I found in one of the homes, the abandoned homes, I found an entire whole potato, which was more than diamonds. It was a lifesaver. I was so elated. And I came home and I put on a pot with water and I tried to cook it in the middle of the day. It was the biggest mistake of my life at that time. What happened was in the Lodz Ghetto, the stoves were not equipped with gas or electricity. We fired them with wood. Wood was the only means we could cook. And that wood, that kindle, produced a black smoke in the chimney. And when I stopped cooking, the smoke was visible from afar. And the Germans, the few that were still stationed to clean up the ghetto, they noticed the smoke and they descended upon me. And they start screaming and yelling and their dogs start barking. There's a Jude da, da müssen wir abholen. There's a Jew there, let's go and get him. Oh my God, I was frantic. I left everything on the stove and I ran for my life to the abandoned buildings where I found a hole there in an attic between the rafters and a plank that I made for myself just in case I have to use it. And I used it. And I pulled back the plank and got into this hole and pulled the plank back and I was breathless. And I didn't know how soon it will be till they find me there. And indeed, they came descending with their dogs and they were coming ever closer, almost like on the second floor. They were already on the second floor. and they was keep on screaming, Jude, come raus, Jude, come out from your hole, you goddamn Jew, come out. And I stood there breathless in that hole, hidden. And then another miracle happened. All of a sudden, the air raid sirens of the city start blaring really loud because they probably expected an attack. That's how close the front was all around us. The Russians were all over the place. And so the German army had a standing order that if the air raid sirens come on, you drop everything, you leave everything, and you run for cover. You run for their bunkers. And so they turned around with their dogs, left the building, ran for the bunkers. And I remained in the hole. And I stood there in that hole for God knows how long, till late at night. And when I didn't hear any more sounds, I didn't hear any whispers or any dark barking dogs, and it was very dark and I was emaciated, I just ventured out slowly from that hole back to my home. And when I came back, it was late at night and I got just a few hours sleep that particular night. When I woke up in the morning, I was despondent. The explosions that I heard for so many days abated. They became non-existent. The Russian army stopped at its eastern seashore of the Vistula River. And for whatever political reasons, they didn't go any further. I wasn't liberated. And I couldn't sustain the situation anymore. And I didn't know what to do next. I was in really great despair. And while all this is happening, I'm looking out in the early morning through the kitchen window and I see a very strange sight in front of me on the sidewalk. A whole bunch of men dressed mostly in white with brooms in their hands, sweeping the sidewalk of the ghetto. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, what it meant. But I was despondent, so I ventured out and I pulled this last guy on the coat and I tell him, and I ask him, I says, excuse me, who are you? What are you doing here? What's going on? He says, we're the White Guard. And I says, what is the White Guard? And he says, well, that's what they call us, the White Guard, because the Germans requisitioned a whole bunch of Jews to stand behind and sweep up the ghetto with brooms and tidy up so whoever comes next in should not see the mayhem that they created. Oh my God, I thought to myself, only a German mind can think of something like that. But I was despondent and I said to them, listen, you need to give me a broom, I'll be one of you and I'll sweep up the sidewalk as well. So they gave me a broom and I started sweeping up the sidewalk, just like they did. And for 2 days we were doing that work. And after 2 days, they gathered us together, took us in a holding area, fed us some soup, some watery soup. And then before long, the cattle cars came and we were transported onto those cattle cars, supposedly, ostensibly, to be taken to Germany for labor. We were the last Jews out of the ghetto, the White Guard, and I was among them. And in those cattle cars, for days on end, it seemed, we were cramped together without food or water, without a means to alleviate ourselves. It was living hell. After many days, the car stopped, the doors flung open from the outside, and on the tarmac was swarming SS with their dogs, with their machine guns on one side, and a whole contingent of striped uniformed prisoners on the other side. And I didn't know where I was because they told us we're going to Germany. So I said to the prisoner next to me, I said, excuse me, but am I in Germany? And he says, no, like hell, you are not in Germany. You are in Auschwitz. At that time, I never heard of Auschwitz. I didn't even know what Auschwitz was. So I says, excuse me, what's Auschwitz? And he says, oh, you don't know yet, do you? I says, no, I don't. So he said, turn around. So I turn around. He says, you see that big red chimney rising up in the air with black smoke coming out of it? I said, yes, I do see it. What of it? And he says, this is where you wind up, in that black smoke. And I look at him and I said, the man is mad. What do you mean? Why would I wind up something like this? What is going on? What are you talking about? Before I knew it, they all gathered us together, the new arrivals, put us on trucks, and took us into the concentration camp itself, to Auschwitz concentration camp. And this is where I found myself, folks, in Auschwitz. I just tried to get the, okay. When I came to Auschwitz, we could see the sign, Arbeit macht frei. This is the gate of hell that we found ourselves in. They assigned us barracks, and over time, they were forming gangs during the daytime, work gangs that are selected on a daily basis to work on hard labor, repairing tracks, bombed out tracks somewhere in the vicinity, and building bunkers or whatever hard work that was assigned to us. But the new arrivals were not assigned to go to work yet. So I was milling around in the very beginning, the very few days, I was milling around at the outside in the courtyard. And I was looking around. And by the way, I couldn't sleep, not the first or the second night when I arrived, because the air raids, not the air raid sirens, but the sirens, it's like ambulances or fire truck, the sirens were blaring so unbelievably strongly that it was deafening, and no, couldn't sleep. And I said to the prisoners who were there before me, I said, excuse me, but why are these sirens blaring day and night? It's impossible to. He says, oh, they do it all the time. They're making selections all the time, 24/7. Selections. So what kind of a selections? They're selecting the able-bodied from the non-able-bodied. And those that are able-bodied remain in the Auschwitz to work. And those that are, they consider not able-bodied, they are being burned in the crematoria and coming up in the black smoke. Those that were before me, they knew that. I didn't. So I was like at the end, at the wit's end, and I didn't know how to react to this. I couldn't wrap my head around it. So I said, excuse me, but are they going with some kind of a program? Do they have a list, some names to go by? No, 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 no. Everything is very random. Random. Well, if this is that random, I may be next. I did not want to be in Auschwitz. I wanted to get the hell out of there that fast, but how? Just impossible. This was an airtight prison. You cannot get out of Auschwitz. No way. And so I stayed there in the courtyard that day, and I mill around, and I see a long line of men lined up in a long line. And I go to the last one in line, and I said, excuse me, are you staying here for food? He says, no. We are staying here to be selected to go to Germany to work, Germany proper, to work in the building trade. And I said, what kind of workers are they looking for? They're looking for workers in the building trade, carpenters, plumbers, welders, mechanics, architects, engineers, people like that. And I was none of those. I was the tailor. They didn't need me, but I wanted to get out of Auschwitz in the worst way. I don't care what means I'm using, I felt to myself. So I stood in line. Now, mind you, after our arrival, we were processed, we were deloused, we were clean shaven, we were given striped clothing, all of us, ill-fitting shoes, and everyone looked like everyone else. If my younger brother would have been standing next to me, I wouldn't recognize him. So I figured if everybody looks like everybody else, I just stand in line. When my turn comes, I'm going to think of something to tell them that I'm in the building trade. Maybe this way I'll be selected to go to Germany. And so I stay in line. And I can see in front of me all these other older men were telling the officer in charge, which happened to be Dr. Mengele himself, but I had no idea at that time. Found it out later. So they were telling him what they were. They were welders and plumbers and carpenters and all in the building trade. And so they were taken to go to the left. And those that were not acceptable, they were going to the right back into the camp to work. When my turn comes, he looks at me I was at that point about 15 years old, 15 or 16. He looks at me and he laughs in my face. And he says, what the hell are you doing here? You are nothing. You still got your mother's milk on your lips. He says, get out of here. So he threw me out into the camp. And I was determined this not to be the last word. And I said to myself, if everybody looks like everybody else and hundreds of people are going through these lines, he will not recognize me if I stand in line again. Maybe this time I'll succeed. And they'll take me to Germany. And so I go back in line. And when my turn comes, he recognizes me immediately and he throws me out of the line and he tells me, if I see you one more time here, I'll kill you on the spot. And at that point, I knew he meant it. But folks, after 3-4 days in Auschwitz, seeing what I've seen, I wanted to get out of there so bad. So the next day I get up in the morning and I'm milling it out of the courtyard and I see a strange sight. I see two very heavy-set burly men carrying a very heavy pole, each one on the end of the pole on their shoulder, and in the middle is suspended a huge bucket of soup. And I go to the guy next to me there and I said, excuse me, but who are you? Why are you carrying? What's going on? Where are you going? And so he tells me, we're taking in the soup from the kitchen to the holding area of all these people that were selected to go to Germany to work. They need to be fed. So we are taking the soup to their holding area. And when I heard that, it was like a light bulb lit up in my brain and I figured this is my chance. So I put my shoulder underneath the pole right in front of this guy at the end. And I says, it's going to be the three of us coming in with the soup. And he says, you can't do that. They know it's only the two of us. If they're going to see three of us, they're going to raise hell and they're going to give us in trouble. I says, no, but if you raise hell and you draw attention to yourself by doing so, then we're all being in trouble. So you best just shut up. You let me walk. All the three of us are going to take in the soup. He gritted his teeth. He had no choice. I was intimidating him. We went into the holding area. The gates opened up. They put down the bucket of soup and I disappear in the crowd. Totally disappear in the crowd of the selected people. And I'm waiting for something to happen. The gate closes. The men leave. After a few hours, the trains come. And I said to myself, you must not be the second or the third person to enter that train. You have to be the very first one. Take no chances. This is your chance. I really didn't belong there. I wasn't selected, but I was in that crowd that was selected, surreptitiously. And here I was, inside the train, the first one. And the Germans were very, very meticulous when it comes to keeping records. They knew that they had only 200 heads. And so they start counting them as we entered the train. 1, 2, 3, 4, you're in German, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so by the time the 200th person was counted, the doors closed and I could hear a lonely voice in the outside screaming, but I was selected, I was selected. Didn't help. He was the 201st and that was one too many. So he was left out and I took his place. Folks, I don't know who that man was. I never saw his face. I don't know his name. But I know one thing. I saved my life, possibly at the cost of this man's life. I don't know. But at the time in which we lived, at the time when our life was hanging on a hair, we lost all empathy. We could not have the luxury of feeling pity. Our hearts, our souls became deadened. I hated myself for being that way, but that's the way it was. And so I found myself in this train, in this cattle car, along with so many others, packed in like sardines. And the trains kept on moving, supposedly to Germany. And yes, indeed, they were going to Germany, all right. Took us a long, long time. And we arrived after very many days. and the doors flung open. And as they flung open, I saw a lot of German soldiers again with machine guns and dogs. And there were also a contingent of prisoners with striped clothing. But there was no tarmac. It was just fields in front of us, really fields. And we didn't know where we were. So as we debarked and they chased us out from the wagons, raus, Juden, raus, raus, chased us out. By the way, when we were at Auschwitz, I told you they took us, these were the bunk beds that we were assigned to live in and to sleep, like sardines packed in. I used to go to sleep in the mornings, in the evenings. By the time morning came and I woke up, the person slept next to me, to the right, and the one next to the left, they were dead. And I was the only one in the middle that survived. And that was a scene repeating itself over and over again on a daily basis. I'm just bringing this up so that you have an idea of the horror that we suffered at Auschwitz. And so when the doors flung open at that time, and we were processed, taken on trucks and taken to the infamous other concentration camp, labor camp called Dachau. And folks, this is Dachau, concentration labor camp. I wound up in this camp, and here's my registration card that I had to register. And on that registration card, which was just recently retrieved, I made myself 2 years older because I had to fill it out than I actually was. And it was a calculation on my part because I knew from experience that if you are considered older, you have a greater chance of survival. And so I made myself 2 years older. And this was when I was admitted to Dachau. After admittance, after delousing, after giving uniforms, after being registered, we were then selected in groups, large groups, and taken to different sub-camps of Dachau, one of which was a cluster of camp named Kaufering. It was in southern Bavaria, in southern Germany, Bavaria, where they carved out large tracts of farmland and created clusters of concentration camps out in the outskirts of the city of Kaufering. And here is when we were taken. This is the entrance to Kaufering slave labor camp. This is how bleak it was. This is where we had to trek through those gates day in and day out. And the barracks were narrow and very tight, and the beds, the bunks were exactly the same like in Auschwitz. The conditions were horrendous during our being in Kaufering. We were taken out in gangs, work gangs, to work on repairing railroad tracks that were bombarded by the Allies. The war was raging all around us, obviously, but we were still building bunkers and all kinds of other very hard labor-intensive work that they took us to. People were starving, and during the winter time, we had frostbite because we didn't have shoes anymore. We had rags for shoes wrapped around us. People starved and died by the thousands. And in 1944, after 2 years, after it became an epidemics camp also, after 2 years, the Allies really, truly were entrenched in German territory, and they came from every side pressing forward in Germany proper, and the Germans felt the pressure of this campaign, and they realized that they must eliminate the southern situated concentration camps like Kaufering and Dachau, and they got us together, eliminated the camp, and shipped us off in cattle cars to be taken from Dachau in the south to Bergen-Belsen in the north. And so we were only allowed to take the little thin blankets that we had on us, and we were trekked to the train station, to the tarmac, and it was a long, terrible walk. And there we were packed into cattle cars and guarded by very many German soldiers with machine guns. And we were going towards Bergen-Belsen, going north. After several hours of this travel, we wound up in a very thick forest in Bavaria. And the forest had running through it two tracks, railroad tracks, one going north-south, the other one south-north. We go north, we're on the right side of those tracks, and we stopped in the middle of the forest. Before long, another train approached from the other side and stopped right across from us. And that other train was a purely military train. You could see the aircraft cannons sticking out in the air, camouflage. So on the one side was full of prisoners to be taken to Bergen-Belsen. The other train was actual German military. And we stood there in that thick forest without being told why we are standing for hours, why it doesn't move either direction, what is happening, where are we going from here, what is next. We were totally oblivious, we didn't know. The Germans knew, we didn't know. So while we are standing there, after many hours, I hear on the horizon a tremendous roar of jets, jet planes. I have never seen a jet up to that moment because everything that I saw so far was propeller-driven planes. But here was a new breed of planes, jets, and they came roaring from the horizon towards us, towards those two trains. The pilots in the air probably saw the military train, and they thought that both of the trains were military trains. They descended, a whole armada of them. These were American planes, folks, American fighter planes. They were in Germany already, and they saw the trains, and they descended upon the trains, and they swooped down really low, and they machine gunned into the trains indiscriminately. And so many of our prisoners in those trains were killed in front of my eyes. It was a river of blood almost immediately. Body parts were flying. People were screaming. And the Germans, of course, immediately jumped the trains into the thick forest to save themselves, but they wouldn't allow us to do that. But I said to my two friends that survived with me, also in that boxcar, I said, we cannot stay here another moment because we're going to be killed. Let's jump over. There was no roofs on those trains. Let's jump over to the forest and try to save ourselves. And so we did. We jumped over, all the three of us, and so many others saw me jump, and my friends, and they start jumping too. And then the Germans start yelling at us not to do it because we're going to be killed by them. They're going to shoot us. And I said to my friends, I don't care how I'm being killed, from the German bullet or from the American in the air. I need to save my life. So we jumped into the forest. Many did, and many were not successful. They died in the trains, killed from the air by the American forces. But when everybody started jumping from the prisoner train, they saw from the air the striped clothing that everybody had, all the prisoners, and they realized that was a big mistake. They realized that they didn't realize that one train was full of prisoners. They thought both of them were military. So the locomotives were on fire, the trains were on fire, and they realized their mistake, so they turned and they left. But the slaughterhouse was done. The mayhem happened. Those of us that survived in the forest, we were surrounded by German military, and we were told not to move until told to move. So we huddled together for 3 days and 3 nights in that forest without any knowledge of what's coming, of what's next. They didn't give us any food or water. It was a horrendous time again. That was in the end of 1944. It was close to 45 actually. Or maybe it was in spring of 45. And so after 3 days, in the next morning, we wake up and we could hear the elder ones among us yelling to the rest of us, "Hey guys, there are no more Germans here. They're all gone. They're all gone. We are liberated." Liberated. That sounded so unlikely, so unreal. The word wasn't even real. So nobody believed it. But the truth was there was no Germans. They were all gone. So after a while, realizing we are left like sheep without a shepherd in the forest, the elder ones among us that were a little wiser, they said to us, "Why don't we just raid the military train for food? I bet there's a lot of food there." And sure enough, we raided the train, and boy, was there a lot of food. Indeed, there was. There were aluminum cans of heavy military rations, pork and beans and all kinds of fatty stuff. And people were so despondent and so emaciated and so hungry, they were trying to break open those cans. They didn't have anything to open it with. So they were banging at the trees, at any hard surface they could find. Some of them succeeded. And those that succeeded gorged themselves on the food. And their bodies were so emaciated and so dried out, they were in no position to process that food. After 2 days, they died. Those of us that were not able to open those cans, we had a greater chance of survival. I was one of those that couldn't open the cans. I told my friends, my 2 friends that were surviving with me, let's go and find someone to talk to and take the cans with us. Wherever we can, we'll open it. And so we set out in gangs, in small little groups actually, into the countryside. After several hours of waiting, we realized the Germans are not there. And we made our way into the unknown countryside. And as we trek along about maybe 30 minutes or so, I could see an outline on the horizon of a hut. It seemed like a roof of a house. And I said to my 2 friends when I saw this, I says, "Look, ahead of you on the horizon, there's outline of a roof. Maybe there's a home there, a house. We can talk to someone. Let's go in that direction." So they said, okay. Out of the 3 of us, I was the only one that spoke a very good German. So we left and we just trekked towards that house. We draggled 3 guys, hungry, thirsty, emaciated. And as we came ever closer, we realized what happened. We got into a hornet's nest, basically, because the entire area was swarming with German soldiers, with tanks. Oh my God, I said to myself, what have we done? We are back into a hornet's nest. And as we are seeing the situation, the forward patrol over there, he saw us 3 boys approaching, so he was yelling at us to stop. Halt, halt, nicht wiedergehen. Stop, don't go any further. He says, I'm coming to talk to you. So he comes forward to us and he looks at us in bewilderment and he says, Wer sind Sie denn? Was tun Sie hier? Was ist los? Who are you? What are you doing here? What's going on? And I tried to explain to him, we were abandoned by the military. We were in a forest and we decided to go and look for help and speak to someone alive that can tell us what to do. He says, well, you can stay here. I'll take you to my commander. So the 3 of us were following him into the house, to the farmhouse. And as he opened the door to the entrance to the farmhouse, I saw in front of me the unbelievable sight on a very overstuffed chair, a very fat German sitting there, bemetaled and top to toe, maybe some kind of a general or some high officer. And he looks at the 3 of us, the draggled 3 boys. He says again the same thing. Verflucht nochmal, was tun Sie hier? Wer sind Sie denn? Ihr könnt hier nicht bleiben. You cannot remain here. Damn it! What are you doing here? And I says, sir, I says, what do you suggest we do? I told him the story. And he said, this is a militärisches Gebiet. This is a military area. And you cannot remain here. You have to turn back and go back where you came from. So I turned back and I said to my friend, let's go. So we turned back, and as we go back about a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, I could hear from the distance in the back of us, a older German's voice in German yelling at us, Burschen, Burschen, geht nicht wieder, bleibt stehen, ich will mit euch sprechen. Boys, don't go any further, I want to talk to you. And so he runs towards us, and he identifies himself as the owner of the farmhouse, of that whole farm. And he says, listen, the war is coming to an end. First time we really heard it from a German mouth to say those words. The war is coming to an end, he said. The German army here is leaving momentarily, and the front is very near, but I want you boys to come with me. I'll put you up in one of my barns on the farm for the time being, and you'll be safe. And he takes us around about on the farm, and he puts us up in a barn with animals. And within no time at all, maybe less than half an hour, all the military left. Their tanks and everybody was gone. And so then after a little while, it comes back, it takes us into a different barn without animals, puts us up on the hay there, bales of hay. He said, make yourself comfortable, we'll be back. An hour later, he comes back with his wife. And I saw a sight that I haven't seen for 6 years. This wife is coming in with a huge tray of hot, freshly baked donuts with jelly, with powdered sugar on top, and a big pitcher of hot milk. And she comes towards us, 3 boys, and says, Ihr Bursche muss ja hungrig sein. Das ist für euch. You boys, you must probably be hungry. This is for you. And hungry. We were starved. We weren't hungry. We were starved. And so we were just gulping down the food. I mean, this is the real food that we had in 6 years, the first time. And so subsequently, they took us away from there, and they put us into a very nice barn, rather large, without animals. But they put up 3 folding beds with real sheets and pillows, and they treated us like human beings. And the woman, the farmer's wife, said to us, we cannot allow you in our home, but we have outside outhouses, and we have outside showers. So you boys can take a shower, and I'll bring you some fresh clothing and some fresh underwear. And she did. And within no time, after we took the showers and we got changed into fresh clothing, we looked at each other and we couldn't recognize each other, that we are the same human beings that we were just a few hours ago. All of a sudden, we start looking like human again. And we realized something incredible is happening. But we still did not believe that we are that close to liberation. And so my friends were frolicking out on the farm one day, and I was in the outhouse. And then while I sat in the outhouse, I could hear rumblings on the outside, rumblings like ominous, like heavy artillery or heavy machinery or tractors or something. And then all of a sudden I heard voices coming towards me in a language that is totally strange to me. I didn't understand one word or anything. And while all this is happening, I hear my 2 friends outside yelling at me, David, come out, come out. We are liberated, the war is over. And I said, oh my God, what is this? So I ran out in disbelief, and I see in front of me an incredible sight. Strange tanks, strange military. They don't look like German at all. And they speak a language I don't understand. And all these soldiers, was a whole battalion of them that occupied the area. All those soldiers were black soldiers, black American soldiers. And I saw for the very first time a real life black American person, because up till that moment in Europe, we didn't see black people. We just didn't. But those soldiers, they were so nice. They were so friendly. They tried to reach out to us. They tried to communicate with us. They tried to make themselves understood. And I tried to do the same thing in desperation. And I started pleading with them. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? You know, do you speak German? I said to him. And he says, no, English. And I said, rozmawiasz po polsku? Do you understand Polish? No, only English. And in desperation, I said, the rest Yiddish, Efsha? Maybe you speak Yiddish? He said, no, only English. And so we were kind of very, very crestfallen. We didn't know how to handle it. So while all this is going on, all of a sudden, among the lines of soldiers, a tall, slanky, white soldier officer, all bemedaled, comes right towards us. And he comes straight to her, looks me in the face, and he says in unadulterated Yiddish, he says to me, "Ihr Jinger, wir sind Jiden." Just like that. "You boys, are you Jewish?" And I'm just like, my jaw falls open. And I said to myself, oh my God, this man is speaking Yiddish. And he's an American officer. And I couldn't understand it. So I said, "Sir, excuse me, I'm delighted that you can speak my language and I could communicate with you, but you're an American officer, how come you speak Yiddish?" And you know what he said to me? He said, "I'm from Brooklyn." Well, folks, let me tell you, I didn't know Brooklyn from Madagascar. I had no idea what Brooklyn was, but it didn't matter. He took us under his wings and he told us that the war is over, that he's taking us away from here in his Jeep. He's going to take us and put us up in an established camp for survivors in the city of Feldafing. And there, the American government is going to take care of us. We're going to be treated. We're going to get the proper care, medicine and food, and we are free people. We don't have to fear the Nazis anymore. The war is over. And this is what happened. So while I was in Kaufering, I just was missing out to show you the slide here. A dead person that was tortured was carried by other prisoners to a mass grave to be buried. We witnessed that situation over and over again during the time that we were in Kaufering. And then when the liberation happened, this is what happened. The liberated prisoners here were showing you how delighted and elated they are to be liberated in 1945. And then there were another set of liberated children by the Soviet army in 1945. And these are the Jewish children that were incarcerated in concentration camp, and they were rescued after the war. And here, after we were liberated, look at us now. We look like human beings again. These are our friends, my friends that were liberated with me. We were in the Feldafing survivors camp. It was a transit camp. And I am right here to the left at the bottom, surviving along with my friends here in 1945. It was a tremendous time of reckoning and kind of bittersweet time, because we were liberated, we got our personal freedom back, but we were left totally alone in the world. That was terrible. And so in 1945, when the war ended, I was 18 years old. And here I am, 18-year-old. I went to Sweden from Germany because I couldn't find anyone in Germany that I could feel is someone I knew. No relatives, no friends, no one that I ever knew I could find after the war. And so Sweden took in 200,000 freed prisoners for rehabilitation. When I heard that in the radio, I said to my friend, let's go to Sweden, and because maybe among those 200,000 we'll find somebody there. And indeed, I didn't find relatives, but I found another treasure in Sweden. And here I was in Sweden with other freed prisoners in Sweden being rehabilitated. Here I am standing up at the door at the age of 18. It was a tremendous time of renewal for us. And here I met in Sweden my beautiful wife, Charlotte, and we got married in 1945 after a very 3-week courtship, if you will. We were despondent and desperate to renew our life and to form a family and to get our lives back. And she was also a prisoner, a concentration camp inmate from Jasina, Czechoslovakia. She was a beautiful young girl, and I was an 18-year-old boy trying to look forward to our lives together and create something out of all this mayhem and chaos. And here is a picture of myself here at 18. I was courting my beautiful girl. And here are the two friends of mine, Sobor and Roman, that survived the war with me. We survived the war. We came to Sweden together, and then Sobor went back to the Ukraine where he was born, looking for relatives there, and we lost contact. And Roman went to Canada subsequently, and we lost contact with him as well. So after the war ended in Sweden, I spent 10 years there. I was trying desperately to get together with my dad, that I found out shortly after I came to Sweden, I found out he's alive. He was in Poland, I was in Sweden. He was newly liberated, and so was I. We had no means, no financial means to travel at all. We couldn't get together. There were a lot of obstacles, and it took us many, many years to see each other again. 12 years, from 1942 when we were separated in Strykow until 1953, till I finally was able to send for my dad a round-trip tickets with a boat to come and visit me from Israel, where he lived after the war. And here is my dad at the age of 88 in Naharia, Israel, and I am 60, visiting him. I've been visiting my dad once I found out he is alive, and only the two of us survived out of 100 people. I visited my dad 40 times in Israel. I was traveling back and forth from America to Israel 40 times. And I'm so happy that I did. And I was very close with my dad. After the war, we had an awful lot to talk about and catch up on all the horrors that we both experienced in our own ways. My dad was in 1945 when the war ended. He was only 44 years old. Look at him, 44-year-old man. He was full of life, but he lost everybody just like I did, except the two of us were the only ones that survived the war out of 100 people. My dad subsequently remarried, and he never had any more children, obviously, but he lived out his life until about 90 in Israel. And so here is my father's father, my grandfather that I was together with. And this is how he looked like when I saw him last in the ghetto in Lodz. And they cut his beard on the street, the savages, the Nazis. They tore the beard off his face, literally tore it off. He came home bloody and in great pain. And this is how he looked like at 60. Also, after we got married in Sweden in 1945, my wife, Charlotte, was under the chuppah with me, along with maybe 25 other couple survivors. It was like a production line going at that time. I remember everybody was young, anxious to form families and reclaim their lives after the Holocaust. Under the chuppah, she was dressed in a white gown, and I was dressed in a beautiful suit, and she was crying. She was crying with bitter tears, and I said to her, I said, honey, why are you crying? This is supposed to be a happy time where we get married. Why are you crying? You embarrass me. Not only this, but I feel like you have second thoughts maybe about me. And she says, David, it is not you, and it is not me. But look around. Whom do you see? Do you see anyone that you love, that we love, that we can share our happiness with? Of getting married? Is there a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, a cousin, and anybody, any relative at all? There's nobody, just strangers. So isn't there a reason for me to cry? And I agreed with her. That evening, we came home to our city of Helsingborg, where we lived. And I embraced her in a tender embrace. And I said to her, honey, I can promise you here and now, this is my vow to you, that if we manage to be blessed to stay together for the next 50 years as husband and wife, I promise you, at that time, I will make you a wedding that you will not forget in your life, a wedding to remember for ages. I will do it and take back the time that we lost. And folks, I did exactly that. And 50 years later, in America, in Los Angeles, I made a magnificent second vow wedding, retaking the vows. Here's my beautiful former wife, Charlotte, myself, my youngest granddaughter, Amy. Here she's 4 years old. She was the flower girl. Today she's 29. Here are my grandchildren and my children with their husbands. And so we built up our family tree from the ashes, literally speaking, from the ashes. It was an effort of great love and devotion. And we were together for 55 blessed years. Then I lost her. So later on, we were going to the March of the Living in Jerusalem for the very first time that I was persuaded by my children, but my younger daughter especially, to go with her on that March of the Living to revisit the roots, as she said. I want to see the roots of where I come from. And so I was reluctant. I didn't want to go, but I did. I was persuaded. And here I'm holding a flag in Jerusalem, marching with the March of the Living. It was an unforgettable experience. And I took her to all the places where I was born, where I was raised, where I went to school. I showed her the building where I was working in the ghetto and the cemetery where my relatives were buried. All these things. And it was a worthwhile endeavor, and I never regretted it. And so then later on, a few years later, we went to, actually this was this year in January, we went for another trip back to Poland, back to Auschwitz, to commemorate the 75th commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz. Here is my middle daughter, Bert. She was the only one with me. And we were at that time commemorating the memory of the liberation of Auschwitz, 75 years. It was an incredible event. So many survivors were there with us to commemorate that time. And here we are talking to the world press. Here am I. There is another survivor, and this is the World Jewish Congress President Ronald Lauder. We were confronting the world press in interviews why we're here and why it is so important to never forget the horrors that happened. So this was this year in January. I'm 92 years old, and I managed still to have the courage to make that trip. It was something that I will never forget. It was very moving, very emotional. And all these experiences that I've experienced, and plus a lot of other details that I cannot get into here, time is not permitting, I was determined to leave a written book about my experiences. And so after 20 years of effort, with many obstacles in between, I managed to finish it last year. And here is the book that I finally wrote and published. And I called it The Compassion of a Deadly Enemy. And I have it illustrated with a soldier that is directing the rifle to my head as a young boy trying to get the potatoes in the sack out of the ghetto barbed wire walls. It is very symbolic of the time that I went through myself. And this book is really getting into a lot of details that I cannot get into in my speech here to you. But I want you to know that as I conclude this program, I'm doing this with only one vision and only one reason. I know by bitter experience the consequences of evil. I know the consequences of people that become indifferent to evil and let it happen. I know and I felt the brunt of the rage of evil spreading like a deadly virus and touches eventually everybody. So I'm impressing upon my audiences that I speak to, mostly to students that are young and impressionable and need to know a lot of information. And my information to you is, when you see evil rising its head, its nefarious head, and if you stand by and do nothing and feel that whatever it is that this evil is touching, it doesn't touch you at the moment, don't ever lull yourself into an illusion that will not touch you the next moment, because it will. Inevitably, it will. We as humans must not ever be indifferent to evil, must not ever be indifferent to discrimination, to humiliation of the other person. We have to be vigilant, and we have to talk to ourselves many times how to be better people, how to accept others for what they are, not for what we would like them to be. And to that end, I would like to conclude my speech to you, and I hope that it has left you with a positive impression. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David. Do we have any questions? We have time for a couple questions. Anybody has any? Well, while we're waiting for anybody to come up with a question, I just want to say I have your book, David, and not to brag, but I do have an inscribed copy from David. So very happy to have this book. David, thank you so much for sharing your story with us this afternoon. Let's see, I know you were very thorough, so I don't know that we have any questions, but I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of everybody today, and we appreciate you so much, and your story is so important to share, and especially with your final message. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. And for as long as I can, I will keep on enlightening people.
Well, we definitely need that.
Because that is my
thank you so much.
That is my mission in life now at this point. I know how important it is. Thank you for enabling me to be on the program.
Thank you. We have some students who are just saying thank you very much, so we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
If there are any questions that any student may have, I'm very happy to answer.
Looks like we don't have any, but
okay.
I know you were, as I said, you were very thorough. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
I was covering all the bases, I guess.
Yes, you did. Very well.
Thank you again. And up till next time, let's all be well and stay healthy and stay safe. And by all means, be very cautious about this terrible pandemic. Be very aware. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David.
Bye-bye. See you later.